Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 7th of June. And I know that I moan a lot, but I think even the people who are most inclined to be like, oh, Jack, why are you moaning so much, will forgive me this week for not being super hype. The fights were not great. But the most not great of all was the Floyd Mayweather debacle going on. He took a special exhibition against Logan Paul. Sorry, the other Paul brother. The one that can't box, actually. Like, if you watch them both, Jake Paul actually pretty decent at boxing, and you could tell that from like his first fight when he was setting things up with his jab, dropping away, trying to counterpunch with his right. Doesn't have a great left hook, but, you know, we talk about it quite a lot. Like, Jake Paul is fairly competent as a boxer. Not world class, but competent. And Logan Paul is not, which is that's quite a surprise for a lot of people, because Logan Paul was considered the better athlete because he wrestled to state standard or whatever. Don't think he won anything prestigious, but like, if you check out, there's a video of him showing like his school, and they show the weight room, and maybe it's just all American schools like that, but like the wrestling team's weight room looked incredible. But anyway, since then he's fucking bulked up and taken a couple of fights, both against KSI, I think they were, and they were both just garbage, both fights and both fighters. But yeah, Floyd even managed to pick the safer Paul, which is fairly impressive, because it's a Floyd Mayweather fight. You know, it will never just be straight up. There's always going to be something about it that he's picked. Oh, well, I mean, if you saw them stare down and you saw the size difference between them, you had to know, like, oh yeah, you must be even worse at boxing than I thought you were. Because if Floyd Mayweather's looked at you and gone, yeah, I'll fight you with a 40-pound weight disadvantage, you know, there must be something he's seeing there. But the interesting part about this was, like, bookies were taking bets on it, kind of like the Tyson Jones one, because it was a special exhibition and there were no judges. But bookies want, you know, obviously the whole point is to draw people in and excite them and create a spectacle, and people want to bet on that. So the way that it worked for a lot of bookies, I think it was Paddy Power I looked at, and maybe Coral, but the way it worked for a lot of bookies was that you could bet on the win, but the win would have to be a knockout. But the way that it was done was like you bet on them to win, because the only way you could win was by knockout or DQ or whatever. But all through the week up to this, people were talking about like how amazing the odds on Floyd were. You know, how someone on the UFC card was like a bigger favorite than Floyd was against Logan Paul. And then when you looked at it, you know, you realized, oh, hang on, there's a bit of a catch there, because you're not betting on Floyd to win. You're betting on Floyd to knock out a man who's 40 pounds heavier than him, taller than him, you know. And also, it's Floyd Mayweather. He's never been a knockout artist. You know, it took him, and I think the fight was only 8 rounds, wasn't it? It took him like 9 rounds to stop Conor McGregor, who's his own size, and that was like the most aggressive performance of his career. So if you tuned in, like, you know, if you tuned in expecting Floyd Mayweather to knock him out, you know, I don't know what you were thinking, but if you tuned in, like, if you put money on it, I mean, I'm not going to laugh about people spending their money in silly ways. I put down a ton of stupid bets every weekend, but it was an odd one to try and bet on this. Because Floyd's not getting paid more if he knocks the guy out. Floyd's getting paid regardless, so he's going to turn up and fight safely, win, you know, get to the end safely. It's more important for Floyd Mayweather that he doesn't lose than that he win, and I think this fight perfectly summed that up. It's very interesting, all this exhibition stuff, because, like, who was it? Blaine, whose second name I can't remember, but he put up a clip being like, oh, here's Tenshin Nasukawa landing the cleanest, a cleaner punch on Floyd Mayweather than Conor McGregor or Manny Pacquiao did. And it's true. Like, if you watch the first, like, minute of that Tenshin fight, they're playfully sparring, then Tenshin cracks him with an amazing left counter, open side counter with the left hand, and that's when Floyd goes, oh, fuck it, I'm knocking you out. And that's because... like, you know, there's exhibitions like Tyson Jones where the understanding was they'd come out and try and kill each other, but they tried to book Tenshin versus Mayweather for a real fight, and then decided that they couldn't pay him enough for that, and then they booked him for an exhibition match, because there was talk of like 10-15 million rise in paying Mayweather for a real match, and then they came down to like 3-4 million for an exhibition match, you know, shorter length exhibition. But the moment that Tenshin punched him for real, he was like, oh, I'm knocking you out now. So Tenshin landed a really good punch by benefit of Mayweather thinking it was an exhibition. The only thing that really happened in this Logan Paul versus Mayweather one was that Logan Paul spazzed out towards the end of the first round and Mayweather covered up. And the thing was, like, he went all headhunting, and you're not gonna cold cock Floyd Mayweather, even at like age 44 or whatever he is. You've got a huge size advantage on him. He's gonna have to put his gloves up to protect his head. Why don't you just try and hit him in the body? Just try and maul him down and tire him out. But the whole event was basically just Logan Paul looking awed to be there and mean mugging. And you're not going to win a fight by mean mugging against Floyd Mayweather because he backed off when you feinted a jab or feigned a jab. Anyway, yeah, that was crap. But it did bring up, that Floyd not being able to, or not even trying to, knock out Logan Paul brings up the idea of size and how important it is. And the other one that made me think about that this weekend was Marcin Tybura versus Walt Harris. Like, Walt Harris gets stuck on the bottom with one hook in. And that's a position where in like a lightweight match, they'll just scramble up and try and do something. They'll go to standing. They might give up their back standing and just try and fight you off by leaning against the fence. But heavyweights can't do that. And then he gets slowly pounded out, and Tybura gets his other hook in. And they like the ref calls the stoppage. And Walt Harris isn't like out cold or anything. He just goes, oh, fuck, and slumps forward onto his belly. And Marcin Tybura can't get up because his feet are stuck inside. That's the difference between like heavyweights grappling and any other sort of weight class grappling. But yes, there was too much heavyweight action on this UFC card. What was good though, Santiago Ponzinibio is back. He fought Miguel Baeza, and it got fight of the night, but it was real ugly. It was basically the height of calf kicking FC, which is what we think that the UFC is going to devolve into. But Ponzinibio likes to back people up and apply the jab. Baeza likes to low kick and back away, particularly calf kick. So he was timing Ponzinibio every time he stepped in for the jab. It's that story. Guys are getting good with the jab, get good with the counter low kick. It's not that the low kick has never been there before. It's that the low kick is especially there when guys are trying to jab. And Ponzinibio was like, his feet were sliding all over the place. And while he was like trying to walk his man down while his feet were basically giving out underneath him, I just couldn't get the image of Gomi out of my mind. Takanori Gomi back in Pride. It's interesting because he was remembered for having good footwork because he could cut the ring really well, which is something we're going to get into later with Trinaldo. But he could cut the ring really well, but when he threw his punches, his feet fucking slid all over the place. And I don't think he helped himself by wearing like ankle wraps, and also throwing his punches really hard and throwing his head in with his punches. It made for a really entertaining style, but his feet would just slide out while he was trying to punch people. And I got a big whiff of that when Ponzinibio was stumbling all over himself. Basically, Ponzinibio brought himself back into it by kicking back for a start, but also pulling his leg away. Like, you can go forward and retract your leg. You can do that. It's not like you have to retreat from the guy to take your foot away. If you pull your leg back into your stance, you retract it, but you can stay where you were. And at the moment he started doing that and made Baeza miss and threatened to come back in on him, Baeza was a lot more reluctant to just throw those kicks whenever he felt like it. But a lot of it was just sort of like gritting his teeth, throwing more than two punches. He'd been throwing like just jabs on their own and getting kicked up. So he started like doubling up the jab, throwing the right hand, throwing twos and threes. And he just sort of gutted his way through it. It was not a return to form, I would say, for Ponzinibio, but he encountered a new problem. Basically, this is what you're seeing at the moment with the calf kick meta. When the good boxer meets the calf kick, he always has a horrible time. And then, the next fight, he starts to work it out, and the next one. And this was Ponzinibio's sort of first encounter with that. Whereas the last fight, he just looked bad. And he said that afterwards. He was like, oh, I looked like shit in my last fight. Still hot on Baeza. I mean, he reminds me a little bit of like what I used to say about Michael Johnson. Gets a lot done with just a few things. Just that low kick, good 1-2, good lean backs and counters, but not an awful lot of weapons. Or really nice front kick to the body too, actually. But yeah, just a few things does him really well. Has great timing. Carries him a long way. What else was on this card? Oh, let's talk about Alon Patrick versus Mason Jones, because Mason Jones looked really good. Like it's basically the Leon Edwards thing again, where the British fighter looked amazing, and then I poked himself out of what was going to be a good win. And if you called it a DQ, wouldn't mind. At this point, you've got to do something to stop people getting poked. And yeah, I mean, you got the risk there of people diving, of people saying, "Oh, I got poked in the eye," but I mean, there was a little bit there with Makwan Amirkhani when he was getting tired. He was like, "Oh, I got poked in the eye," and the ref went, "Did you?" And he went, "Oh, no, not really." But I don't want to be that guy who's like, "Oh, if you pay these fighters too well, they won't fight." Like no, they're there, they're doing the job. They probably don't want to win by eye poke, most of them. But if you allow video replay, which most places do now, why not just give stiffer penalties for actually poking people in the eye? If there's an eye poke that stops the fight for a good length of time, and you go to the replay and you see that it is clearly a finger going in the eye from splayed fingers going out, just take a point right there. That's the way to start dealing with this. You don't even have to DQ people. Just keep taking points. Like they'll learn because they're still going to lose the fight. But up to that point in this fight, Mason Jones had looked really good. He'd been backing him onto the fence. Alon Patrick, I talked about it last week, but I said he takes a run up into any of his attacks. And when Mason Jones put him on the fence, he's suddenly like trying to hype himself up to sprint off the fence towards Mason Jones. Mason Jones is just dropping away. Patrick's the southpaw. Jones is the orthodox fighter. He's throwing that retreating open side counter with his right hand. The McGregor, the O'Malley favorite, Tenshin Asakawa. More McGregor in this one because he was just putting him on the fence and front kicking him and then dropping away. But he'd do it with jabs too. Patrick would like put his face out and Jones would just jab his face and Patrick would like double back, like he was about to fall over. When Patrick came forwards, Jones looked good in the clinch. I think I said he started out in judo as far as I knew and then went into MMA through that and then learned to strike through that. But he's been working with Team Alpha Male too, so, going to be dealing with better wrestlers than Alon Patrick every day. What I said about Alon Patrick last time was like really fun, good top player, great grappler, but another one of those guys, like even Andre Galvao, one of the greatest grapplers of all time, couldn't reliably take people down in MMA. And if you can't get yourself into top position, you're not going to pull guard and sweep them in MMA, Unless, Damian Maia and Rafael Lovato have sort of used that pulling into half guard but with the underhook and then coming up on the single, which is really more an extension of the single leg. What I mean is like you're not going to jump closed guard and then roll them over the top of you with a roulette sweep or anything like that. There was something missing from Jones' performance. I mean, I looked at the stats afterwards and he actually did land a good amount of body shots, but I thought those periods where Patrick was along the fence and Jones would come in with like a jab or a double jab and Patrick would be diving his head all over the place trying to stay away from it, I think that's when Jones could have been digging the wide right to the body or even the left hook after the right hand. It was a place where Patrick was completely open, and Jones has good power in his hands. It takes some confidence to do. Like you are dropping your hands to hit someone in the body. There's no two ways about it. If you go watch that Filthy Casuals Guide to Muslim Salikhov I put up, like there's a section on Roberto Duran. I've got a question about Roberto Duran this week, but there's a section on Roberto Duran using the jab to get in and counter underneath the opponent's arms, used the right hook to the body constantly, and he would just have to slip with his hands down afterwards. He'd throw the right hook. He knew the opponent was coming back, so he'd slip to the inside and either tie up or just duck out the side door. I think that's the thing with right hands to the body. We watched Michael Chandler get caught off it with the left hook. If you're going to throw the right hand to the body, move your head afterwards. There are people like John Lineker who can go wide right to the body, come up with the left hook afterwards, but you're going to eat the left hook probably. And if you've got an iron jaw like John Lineker, that's fine, but most people probably not worth doing unless you really have the opponent shelling up. But yes, from Jones, I would have liked to see more going to the body with his hands. Front kick almost got him into trouble a few times. That's something that isn't really appreciated about Conor McGregor and Sean O'Malley when they use that front kick. They're very good at controlling the opponent off the front kick. So if they get their front kick caught or parried, they can keep them out at leg length. They can kick their foot over the top of the hand to free it. You'll see guys get their kick caught and push kick through the hand to keep the guy off them. Very Muay Thai style answer to having your leg caught. And I always think everyone, kick more, get your legs caught, and practice elbowing people with one leg in the air. It's the best time to catch them because they've got their hands down. They can take a punch on the head because they'll duck their jaw in and tuck their shoulders up, but they can't stop you from cutting them. So that was very disappointing, that eye poke, and it really did. Like, he'd been warned a couple of times, but you get so desensitized to watching them that I'd basically forgotten he'd been warned. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying he'd forgotten he'd been warned, but I'm just used to there being a couple of eye pokes in every fight. So then I went back and realized, he had been doing that up till that point. It's a pain in the ass, and something needs to be done about it, whether it's the gloves or the rules. At some point, someone's going to start cracking down, or there's going to be a couple of high-profile DQs for it, and the other refs are going to feel okay about enforcing it more. There was talk of enforcing it more strictly after the Leon Edwards one. The refs of the next card got together and they were like, we're going to really crack down on this. And then they just sort of took the foot off the pedal. What else did I enjoy? Oh, okay. Kamuela, Kirk. I'm going to call him Kirk, but Kamuela, Kirk versus Makwan, Amirkhani. This is really interesting because Makwan, Amirkhani was hot shit for a little while. And then he had some injuries and stuff, but he had to take some time off. Then he sort of ran into better competition, hit a wall. He had that really bad fight with Shane Burgos. Had a good fight with Edson Barbosa, I thought. I thought he really fought up to the level of the competition there. I mean, he lost, but he did well. But then he fought Kirk here, and it was the same old shit. Same old stuff getting him in trouble. The guy, I mean, he had a ton of wrestling experience, but the guy fights like he's wrestling. And this is something Justin Gaethje said before, but like, Justin Gaethje was, when they asked him, why don't you wrestle? He was like, because I used to wrestle 7-minute rounds or whatever, 7-minute matches. I'm not going to wrestle for 15 or 25 minutes because I can't. And Makwan Amirkhani does, like, he just wrestles and tries to do it for 15 minutes and gets knackered. And part of that's going to be like the way he's fighting, but also a lot of that is going to be conditioning. There's no way around that. Maybe he doesn't have the genetics to like naturally have great conditioning. There are people like, Firas Zahabi was always saying like George St. Pierre was just amazingly conditioned and didn't have to do an awful lot of work for it. But everyone can improve their conditioning. And Makwan Amirkhani's conditioning has like stayed the same forever. Like he gasses reliably in the second round. And I don't understand, like if you are not a heavyweight, and I say this with disgust towards heavyweights because they should also be in condition, but you can get away with it up there. If you aren't a heavyweight, and you can't go 3 rounds fighting, your fight. That's what Makwan Amirkhani gets tired doing, his own fight. And people like Claudio Gadelha and people like that. If you can't do the full 3 rounds at that pace, your type of fight, probably consider a different career. Because if you're working on your conditioning and you honestly can't get it to that point, then you're not built to be an athlete in this sport, It's bonkers to me turning up like in that kind of condition, because I mean Kirk's good and he didn't actually like hurt Amirkhani that much, but when Amirkhani was in with like Shane Burgos, that was a nightmare come to life. You don't want to be in there with someone like that when you can't defend yourself. That's when you're going to get actually hurt or killed. Lots of jokes about him being on that Straight Blast Gym Island treadmill protocol, but I don't think he's actually been over to SBGI for a couple of camps. But seriously, dude needs to get some fucking conditioning. And the crazy thing is, like, that's something you can work on anywhere. Most fighters run every day. Okay, run more miles. Most fighters run every day. Run faster. Get a better pace up. Do a ton more. Just add more volume and do tons of, relatively low intensity conditioning and build up your fucking aerobic system. But the guy just, like, doesn't have it. Like, second round comes out. He in the first round, let's talk about the interesting stuff he does. He's southpaw. He uses a lead right hook over the top of the opponent's hand when they come in. So a counter right hook. Sorry, lead. I meant like lead hand, but a counter right hook over the opponent's top lead shoulder as they come in. Was clubbing Kirk with that in this one. Caught Edson Barbosa a number of times with it, so he can hit good guys with it. Then he does this great thing where he hand fights and then he drops his hand below the opponent's lead hand because they're normally orthodox and he's southpaw, and he shoots an uppercut or an up jab with his lead hand. And hits him under the chin. And he never like combination punches off it or throws anything useful off it. But he does land that one strike, and then that sets up him dropping on the leg for the single. And he did it tons to Edson Barbosa. I think he did it to Burgos too, but he did it to Kirk here. And Kirk, like, he got in on the single well, and Kirk just defended it. And I was like, oh dear, that's not good. If there were points in this fight, like Amirkhani would get the leg all the way up on his shoulder, and Kirk would be standing there with his leg above his own head height. And his hands on Amirkhani pushing him away and trying to fight from that position, and he managed it. But what Amirkhani was doing, like, there's just things that he at one point like picked up Kirk as he was like scrambling up from the floor and back arched and soupleed him over his head. And it wasn't like just a little pop of the hips. It was like he labored into that. And you're going, why? If you've got a history of gassing, are you doing shit like that? Khabib Nurmagomedov has one of the best wrestling gas tanks we've ever seen, and he was still doing just like little basic mat returns over and over again, because you don't get points for fucking suplexes. There's a reason that Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of the best ever, and Rustam Habilov is just some guy who suplexed a dude once. But a lot of this fight played out with Makwan Amirkhani on top and not really doing anything. And Kamuela Kirk was attacking him with arm bars and triangles and things like that. And I really liked that the judges just didn't give Amirkhani anything for laying on top. Because basically, like, the live thread for this on Reddit was just, and on Twitter too, was just people being like, why is he not doing anything? Why is he just holding top position? He's not even throwing elbows or anything. You know, holding top position and throwing short elbows, some people consider that stalling because it's not particularly like working towards a finish most of the time. But at least you're doing something and accruing some damage. And if you catch the guy clean, maybe you knock him out. But it's just, Amirkhani was doing nothing on top. And basically, like, end of the second round, they go to the corners. They show them both in the corners. I thought it was perfect. Kamuela Kirk's coach said to him, you took this fight on 1 week notice and he's fucking tired. And that was like the level of incredulity I consistently have towards Amirkhani's conditioning. And then in Amirkhani's corner, he's like gasping for air, bent over on the stool. And any time Kirk hit him with the right straight to the body, he looked like he was going to fold in half. And then just like the last round, he's just loading up on one punch at a time, diving on singles and missing them. You know, it's just, there's a lot of interesting things that Amirkhani does. It's just that he's not in shape to actually do them. You know, maybe he has some medical issue like Zabit, but, you know, at a certain point you've got to go, I'm losing to much worse fighters, like rank-wise, and on short notice too. You know, I was preparing for a fight, Kamuela Kirk was not, and I'm getting out-conditioned by them. That's a problem. Anyway, what else was good? Muslim Salikhov versus Francisco Trinaldo. Another one with eye pokes, unfortunately. To Salikhov's credit, he was like, yeah, can I have something to wipe my eyeball, please? And eventually got his eyeball wiped down by the doc. But yes, this is interesting. Like, no real jabbing again. But again, Southpaw versus Orthodox, so a little bit more forgivable. But constant shoulder feint back away. Good kicks. He was using the round kicks to the open side, which you don't see from Salikhov a lot. Well, he does. Actually, he will switch and use his lead leg against most orthodox opponents. But you got to see him open up with his right leg, which was good. A couple of good spin kicks. They had good counters when Trinaldo sort of waded in on him. And Trinaldo, like, you saw what makes Trinaldo in with a very slick striker, and he's still clubbing him with overhands. You know, just ugly punches timed well. But I think Trinaldo, what let him down in this fight a lot was his, say the word, Jack, ring craft. No, but it was like he circles a lot to the left to try and loop that left hand over the top of the opponent's right hand, or to draw the right hand and throw over the top of it. So he was circling to his left a lot against Salikhov, or just doesn't really create any pressure on his right, and that's partly to do with sort of his Dan Henderson. Well, we call it like the Dan Henderson problem, but Hendo, you know, he was always crouched down on his right hand, loading up like he was about to throw a baseball. But basically side on to the opponent. So he could hit with a left hook, but he had to load the left hook first by either throwing his right hand or squaring up. And if you're trying to cut the ring on someone, doing it side on is quite hard because it takes away that lead hook. So guys like Conor McGregor, I've used him already as an example, but used to cut the cage on people and fights quite side on, didn't really have much of a right hook. So he used a wheel kick and a back kick to take up the to shut the door on the other side from his left hand. Whereas Trinaldo didn't really have that, and he wasn't really close enough to the fence to even do it. You need to be able to, like, he'd move forwards or to his left, and Salikhov would just circle around to his own left. So Trinaldo was trying to close him down and eat up distance and create longer exchanges where he could land more punches, and Salikhov was just able to circle out. He really needed to get across to his right side to strafe a bit and try and get Salikhov circling to his left and towards the fence. To Trinaldo's left, that is. Salikhov's right. So yeah, bad ring craft let him down there. But you still got to see moments of him being him, like he just clubs his way into a double collar tie over Salikhov's arms and then throws him over a outside trip. Yeah, not really enough wrestling from Trinaldo, but he does a lot of his wrestling through like very low I want to say low athleticism entries, but just like he'll box into, or rather he'll punch into a clinch, and then he'll use the outside trip along the fence is one of his usual go-tos. I think a bit more work on footwork here could have got him back into the fight earlier. Whereas Salikhov's footwork looks brilliant. You know, he was doing all the right things, countering well, And it's just sad that he didn't score a big knockout because nobody's going to watch that Filthy Casuals guide yet. But I'll keep it up and see if he scores a big knockout in the next one. Yeah, I think that was about it. Hold on. Oh, okay, we'll do the two heavyweight ones. Marcin Tybura versus Walt Harris. Marcin Tybura keeps up his record of being a punching bag and just outlasts Walt Harris. I only want good things for Walt Harris because he's had such a horrible recent few years in his personal life, and we all remember his daughter and everything about that. But he isn't very good. Like, he does just swarm on people and then gas out. And the commentators being like, Walt Harris has said that's no longer a problem in the first minute of the first round, and then wouldn't you know it, in the third minute of the first round, it's literally the same problem again. And then the main event was Jarzinho Rozenstruik versus Augusto Sakai. Rozenstruik, fair play to him, put some pressure on him, backed Sakai onto the fence. And Sakai was trying to kick, and what we have said about Jarzinho Rozenstruik in the past is I do actually really like the way he closes off kicks. Anytime over him through like a round kick to the head or body, Rozenstruik would catch it and immediately return with a left hook and a right straight. And he closes the distance real quick for such a big man. And that is probably why it's more annoying than anything like those fights where he doesn't engage, because you are so much faster than a lot of these heavyweights. You're not going to get caught coming in, or if you do it well, or if you set it up with some fucking kicks or something like that, which he almost always refuses to do. But he closed off the kicks a few times, and then just towards the end of the first round, last few seconds, he backs Sakai towards the fence. Sakai starts circling along it. He hits him with a little left hook on the chin and then a right hand high on the temple. And basically it's because Sakai's head came up, and part of that was the left hook, which was really nice. A little short left hook raised his head. And part of that was because Sakai just doesn't keep his chin down when he circles the cage. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's not like a highlight reel stoppage. Some people will think it was, but good for Jarzinho Rozenstruik. Hope he gets a little bit more aggressive now, because while it was still like not a lot of action until very late, it was an example of him going forward and making something happen rather than waiting for the other guy to dive his face onto a counter. So that was all that was interesting from that card to my eye. Let's answer a question and then we'll get out of here for today. Got a couple of questions from Vanille, who has been sending the same message over and over again. Which fighter would you say is/was a fight genius, using any metric you like, making it fight adjustments or best game plan? As you say, fighting is a game of wits. Who never got outwitted, even if they may have lost? Also, how is The Sopranos going? How far along are you? How the hell have you not seen it before? Please don't tell me you haven't seen The Wire. If you have, which one do you like more? And then finally, why do you and other analysts like Roberto Duran so much? Jake Paul forcing fighters to form a union. Bless Vanille. Fight geniuses. Do you know what? I'm going to take the Duran one in there too. I think Duran was sort of a genius. Yeah, he longevity is always a good sign for me. Not so much in like the higher weight classes in MMA, obviously, where it's just slop, but longevity in like a competitive sport, one where there's lots of guys, good athletes vying for top position. Always a good sign. Duran changed his whole game. He used to be a very aggressive sort of banger. And then the more he fought up in weight as he got older, the more he relied on his jab, used his jab to enter and hit the body. And you saw a lot more of him like using his infighting instincts that he built up through years of just battering people on the inside to not only outland bigger opponents on the inside, but also shut them down. He had a really good way of just blocking people at the elbow with his forearm or smothering their bicep with his glove. Just like the last sort of days of Duran being a top contender at welterweight, middleweight, you get, because everyone's physical decline will eventually make it so that they can't fight competitively anymore, no matter how good you are technically and how smart, how high your fight IQ is and how good everything else is. Your reflexes will slow. You won't be able to, the button inputs get a bit of lag on them. You won't be able to do it anymore. But Duran's last days, like as a really competitive guy, you get to see a really different product to like the animal who was just going through lightweights, basically on his power and his aggression. And he was defensively very good. He could slip like 10 punches in a row. Just brilliant. But yeah, who is/was a genius? I think, it's difficult because how do you define it? I always find when I'm looking for like a fighting genius, if you're a very good hitter and you develop like good to great technical ability, you're going to be smoking everyone. Francis Ngannou sharpened his game up a bit, and now he's just unstoppable. But if you're a good hitter, like, you've got that advantage over everyone anyway. Add a bit of technique, you could be an all-time great. If you have big shortcomings and you're still doing excellently just on your technique, I think that's the real sign of a genius. Someone like Willie Pep, who couldn't hit for love nor money. In MMA, like Dominic Cruz, while his game did fall apart when Cody Garbrandt made him lead, he still has almost no threat of knocking people out. But he can still dance around them and make them look like a fool, make them do what he wants them to. It's really quite incredible. You can look at the GSPs and people like that, just who always leveraged their own abilities in the best ways possible, but also worked their other abilities up to the level of their opposition. He could strike comfortably with prime Thiago Alves. He could wrestle with John Fitch and Josh Koscheck, Matt Hughes. And he knew when to do it too. Like, he knew when he would surprise them by wrestling with them. And he knew when he had to go to the jab and the striking to take some pressure off the wrestling. I think while his stock has just plummeted over recent years, BJ Penn is a very good example of a fighting genius. Because half the stuff he did that is also now commonplace in MMA, he basically invented. He was a BJJ savant. Basically came from a rich family. They put him in Ralph Gracie's gym, and he just lived there for 3-4 years or whatever, got his black belt, went to the Worlds, did amazingly. I think he was the first American to win the Mundials, the Worlds in the gi. But not tremendously accomplished no-gi. Never went to ADCC, even though I think it was around the year. Yeah, it's been around since 99. I think he won the Mundials in 2001 or something like that. But again, yeah, as I was saying, really accomplished gi player, goes to train with Frank Shamrock to get into MMA. And you don't really see a lot of Frank Shamrock in him. You see something entirely new. Like the weave passes and shit that he was doing in MMA weren't even big in jiu-jitsu until 5 years later. And we can talk about how he had so many physical gifts, like the amazing chin, great reflexes, ridiculous leg dexterity. But when you watch his passing, his work from the back, trapping the arms and stuff, I think that also predates Marcelo's run. Marcelo turned up around 2003, 2004. I think Penn was doing it in the UFC in his first or second fight there. Bringing the jab into MMA, improving the standard of boxing in MMA. He sucked at checking kicks, didn't kick well himself, but he brought boxing to MMA, really made it a bigger part of the game. And just came up with so many little things that are now commonplace, like the left hook to the double leg, like the very short, close level change. It was basically Habib's staple to his early UFC run. Feeding the single, going to the fence when guys shoot on you, just so many things that Penn was doing that are now either commonplace or still only being used by the top level guys. Not really a genius outside of fighting, but then who is? But then genius can mean a lot of things, because genius could just mean incredible aptitude for something. But in that Penn era too, Kenny Florian, a guy who didn't have an awful lot of physical talents, and he'd fight at huge weight disadvantages in tough, and get by on his technique. Not a great hitter, but TKO'd a lot of guys by timing great elbows. Yeah, he stands out because BJ Penn, obviously technical savant and also hugely physically gifted. Kenny Florian, I would say, much less physically gifted in a lot of ways, but also really sharp technical mind for the game. I think with technical genius, a lot of the guys who are technical geniuses are going to be kind of underwhelming to a lot of people, because technical genius, if you have to have technical genius, it's because you can't knock people out normally. If someone has technical genius and is knocking someone out, everyone already knows about it because they're one of the best in the world already. I'd say find people who aren't great finishers maybe submission artists, but people who aren't great knockout artists or don't have great power and who are still competing with guys who do have great power. It was like the Paulie Malignaggi thing that I always used to. I back when Paulie Malignaggi was quite relevant still, he took that fight with Miguel Cotto on the way up, and sort of after then, I never really liked Paulie Malignaggi because he didn't have any power. But then you do have to stop yourself and go, if he doesn't have any power, why are people not able to just walk him down? Why does it take someone as good as Miguel Cotto to finally catch up to him? And obviously, Paulie Malignaggi, bit of a laughingstock nowadays because of his graceless exit from boxing, but that's every boxer ever. If you watch Paulie Malignaggi at his best, He's beating guys who can hit a lot harder than him, who can take his shots, and he's still outmaneuvering them and out-jabbing them and out-positioning them, And people will be reluctant to give him his credit for that because of who he is, but that's the sort of extreme of technical ability when everyone goes, look at this pillow-fisted guy, and the guys who are fighting him know that he's supposed to be pillow-fisted, but they can't just walk him down. Power is supposed to be what keeps people off you, and if you don't have that, how are you keeping people off you? Anyway, Sopranos. What I don't know what season or episode I'm on. AJ's annoying. Does that ever change? But where am I? Paulie's in jail. Hesh is still great. The priest isn't in it enough anymore. He was a great character, and I loved him. Yeah, I mean, basically, those are the only things I watch it for, aside from the Tony and Carmela scenes and the Tony and Dr. Melfi scenes. Brilliant acting, just love it. Yeah, how did I not see it the first time round? I don't know. It's one of those things where I had it on my list, like, I will watch that. I'll catch. I think it was when people were talking about, like, the last series and the famous finale and stuff. I was going, yeah, no, I've been meaning to watch that for a while. I'll watch it all when it's done. And then I put it off for a little bit. And somehow that little bit became, like, the best part of 20 years. Because now I'm watching the show and going, oh, I know them. What have they been in? And I Google it, and they're, like, 20 years older. I'm like, fuck, what happened? I'll tell you what's hilarious, though. Steven Van Zandt from Little Steven from the E Street Band. The soundtrack for The Sopranos has like a dozen E Street Band, Bruce Springsteen, Little Steven songs on it. That guy was picking up paychecks left, right, and center on that show. And they're always eating. Like, you can understand how, like, when people are talking about like how James Gandolfini died of a massive heart attack and how much weight he gained over the series, doesn't help that literally every scene takes place in a restaurant or eating meat outside the deli, or just him going to the fridge and making a sundae and eating it. But what a great show. And I haven't seen The Wire, and I now know that I'm going to get 1,000 comments being like, you haven't seen The Wire? But I will watch The Wire after this. Though lockdown's ending, so I might have a life again soon. So I might have waited too late into the lockdown to start The Wire. I've only got a couple of weeks to finish The Sopranos before I'm actually allowed to go and grapple with sweaty men again. Trying to keep the old conditioning up through this entire period, because I was just like, I'm not going to remember anything when I get back on the mats. It would be great to do this not like dying in the first round of sparring. I would like to be able to be like, oh shit, I don't remember any of it, but also be there for the entire however many rounds people roll. And why do we like Roberto Duran so much? I think I just explained it. He's the fighter's fighter. People love him. Brilliant infighter, learned to be a brilliant outfighter, amazing killer instinct. One of the, possibly the best lightweight of all time, depending on how you rate like Benny Leonard. There's a couple of others in there, but Duran is really up there. And most importantly, like, most of what people have seen of Duran and what people remember of Duran, most of it happens after Duran's prime. The era of four kings, Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, Duran. Duran is the smallest, he's the oldest, and he'd been lightweight champion of the world for like 5 years by the time the other three went pro. So the elder statesman, I mean, he probably had the worst record of them all as a round robin. But to be competitive with those guys, up in weight, giving up age, giving up height, weight, everything, and still be as good as he was, that's why Roberto Duran is so well regarded. Cheers, Vanille. Right, I reckon that'll do it for today. If you want to get in on the Patreon stuff, read Advanced Striking 2.0, Dustin Poirier, and Tommy Loughran if you're a real nerd. Sign up to Patreon, support the podcast, get extra shit. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack, and we're going to be talking about some real fucking fights next time I see you. The Paul brothers desperately hiding their hairlines bless.